All right, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to talk about how feminism derailed civil rights and some of the consequences of that are going on right now. And really, I'm trying to look at it from both perspectives and both sides of the argument. When it comes to white men and black men, there are some highly valid arguments, and then there are some arguments I think are more just kind of, you could say, long-standing disagreements within the communities that are not being talked about in a really like frank way, or being ignored, kind of, I guess would be the best way to put it, that the issues of the other parties are being ignored in a way that is blatantly like not true. Okay, so first of all, from reading the Carol Quigley book, Tragedy and Hope, near the end, he did talk about how, liberalism was supposed to work. And one of the main key features is that any group that participates in a democracy has to be prepared for their own disenfranchisement to be able to be included in a democratic process. Right? You have to be prepared that if other people vote to diminish your political power, that you have to be able to withstand that or whatever for the 4 years or 2 years or however many years in between the time where you get to vote again, right? And it might possibly be forever, right? And as we can see, women are not prepared to be disenfranchised. Now, I think white men have displayed a high degree of willingness to be disenfranchised at their own expense, and black men to a certain degree as well. But black men never really got enfranchised. That's part of the disagreement that black men have, right? Is that we never really got enfranchised in the same sense as black women did. All right. So we're going to look at some data here. And specifically, we're going to look at the Target 2023 Workforce Diversity Report, where it shows the outcomes of their diversity, equity, and inclusion program, I guess, for that year. And as we can see here, that when it comes to diversity, that women benefited the most from the diversity programs for the most part. We can see in total, more women work at Target than men, right? And that's going back to the whole men need money in order to attract females. Females don't need money to attract men, and that's part of the reason of the breakdown of the family, is that we've swapped this around, and biologically it just doesn't work at all. Because women, like I said, women are not going to hunt down men in order to, provide resources to them. And in fact, all these women are going to be looking for men that don't work at Target, that are like doctors or lawyers or something like that, because that's how it works for women, right? So you can see, the total, and then when you go up the pyramid, it kind of, goes back to what you'd expect. But the fact is that most of this, and when you're talking about the board of directors being mostly male, it's mostly white men. So when, white men are complaining and saying that black men are disenfranchising them, it's not true. It's just not true. We can see here that pretty much across the board, women have displaced men in the workforce. And now that's affecting all races of men. This is affecting all this right here, this total gender diversity, where it's 56% female and 43% male. That's affecting all men. I want to make that clear, that I'm not against any racial group of men or women in general, But, if we're going to talk about biological reality and facing up to the biological realities, then this is one of the main problems of civil rights, is that men and women are not the same. When you give women money, they're not going to hunt down men, right? So you got to think, right? Like, let's just say, for example, that this is representative of the entire economy, which it basically is when we're looking at, female college graduation rates and female employment rates across the board. We can see why there's so many men, quote unquote, living in their basement, in their mom's basement. Well, it's because they've been displaced in the workforce. And then these same women will be demanding a man with a high paying job. So they're caught in this catch-22 of, we want a man that has more money than us, but we also want men to pay us more than them. I mean, it's just, it's obviously not going to work, right? So we'll look at these more specific numbers. And we can see that, again, when you take the total of all these groups, basically Hispanic, Latino is going to be the biggest group, then Black and Asian. It's basically totaling up to 56% of the workforce. And 43% of the workforce is white. Now, I'm not sure if that's representative of I think it should be about 65% white people. So there you can say that white people have been displaced from the workforce, for sure. For sure. But then if you're going to say that, oh, it's Black men that are doing the displacing, not really. It's mostly Hispanic, Latino. Right. And then as you go up the food chain, it increasingly becomes white dominant up to the, CEOs and stuff like that. It's basically, as we saw here, so it's basically the people that are making the most money working at Target are still white men, as we can see from this chart. So you can say it's an apex fallacy or whatever, but still clearly white men have not been displaced from the highest rungs of society. And I think that needs to be, kept in mind when we're talking about, how civil rights has affected white people, Black people, whoever, right? You can see, the higher up you go, the more white people there are and the more men there are. So when you're talking about leadership and the highest paying jobs, well, that's about 50-50, right? The leadership team. I think that's the highest paying. No, board of directors would be the highest paying. So we can see that at the highest rungs of society, it's still white men, right? That's probably not going to change, right? So now we've got the kind of post-Obama politics, right? Now, I think that Obama was more of a psychological thing than it was actual political shift, at least at the time, right? It was more a thing where, a lot of white people felt that just electing one Black man into office was the metric, right? It's very similar to this. Like, at first you might not think that's very similar to this, but it goes back to the, being willing to be disenfranchised during the political process, right? Where, we can see that 56% of women, so women at some point, there's some point in the other group's mind where it's like, okay, well, we've been disenfranchised this much. Now it's time to go back the other way, right? Now it's time to go back to maybe 50% total gender diversity or more, taking into account biological differences. And it's the same thing with Obama. I think in a lot of people's minds, Americans' minds, that Obama was a demarcation line, like basically saying that, okay, well, we've elected a black man as president, and so therefore the disenfranchisement in some senses is over for black people, right? But then, obviously we can see the workforce numbers and stuff like that, and especially for black men, it's low, right? And black men aren't really reaching the highest levels of pay, and we'll get into that with the IQ differences and stuff like that. But I think that the IQ differences are very important when it comes to this, right? Because adult males' IQ are on average 4 to 5 points higher than those of adult females, right? So that's black men, white men, Jewish men, Latino men, Asian men. Men are typically smarter than women, slightly smarter, right? But the problem comes in when you've got all these average, because there's not a lot of leadership team positions. There's not a lot of officer positions. There's not a lot of board of directors positions, right? Most of the positions in most jobs are going to be the middle of the road average job, somewhere in between you being an average income worker at that company to a slightly above average income worker or a slightly below average income worker at that company, right? So women having this slightly tighter bell curve, there's more women occupying this average intelligence, and since we've taken most of the strength jobs away, right, it's very easy for women to displace the average man. And so that's really what we're talking about here, right? Average white men, average black men, average Asian men, right? That's who's been displaced by this 56% female gender diversity quota, right? So the average person, basically, the average man is being displaced by the average woman, right? And so it's causing problems between, average men in the average. Because you notice that the elites, they don't care about it. They don't care about the racial stuff. That's why they're fine with bringing in the H-1B visas. That's why they're fine with, Mexican immigrants coming in and doing field work, because the people that are at this top level of IQ or at the top level of leadership boards or whatever, they're not affected by it. Who's affected by it are the average IQ men. The average IQ men are the ones that are getting displaced by women, right? And then they're the ones that women are telling them that they ain't nothing and they can't compete with them and blah 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 blah. But really, it's not that they can't compete. It's just that they've been displaced by DEI, right? Both men and women, right? All right. So before we go on, you can check out, I got my FBA hat here. I got a couple of them, but I don't want to take the other one out of the bag. So you can say, you'd be like, oh yeah, I got an FBA hat. Okay, done. All right. So this really is kind of gets to the crux of like what the disagreement is, right? Because as we can see that on average, black men are more intelligent than black women. But for some reason, the metrics of society puts black men below black women, and it's due to this IQ bell curve, DEI hiring nexus that I just tried to explain. Hopefully I explained it clear enough. That, women, black women, white women, Latino women, Asian women, occupy that central, just around 100 IQ space in the bell curve where they can be hired as an average worker by any company that doesn't require strength labor, right? Which is most companies nowadays, since we displaced all our manufacturing to Asia, right? So this is what black men are upset about, that the civil rights movement didn't work, even though black men fought in the Civil War and Vietnam and even some in World War II, the Revolutionary War. Not so much in the Revolutionary War, but I mean, Crispus Attucks did get shot, and basically all the wars, black men fought in all the wars, and then they were at the same time they were displaced by black women, right? And at the same time, like your average white guy was also displaced by white women, and then you've got this elite class of white men at the top that basically don't care about racial issues because they're going to attract white women anyway, and they're not worried about being displaced from their job by any of these lower groups, white women, black men, right? So this is really black men's complaint, is that we got stuck on the bottom of the social hierarchy due to the confluence, and at the time, the timing of it, right? Because of the IQ bell curves, right? Even average IQ white men are going to be above black women. They're going to basically be at the same level as white women, because that white women are at the average. And so white women aren't going to want them because they're at the same level as them. And then, then you're talking about doing interracial dating. It's not people's preference. It's 98% of people are married in racially homogenous relationships. So, the interracial thing, I think it's kind of a MacGuffin, because it's not really something that most people are even interested in a realistic way. I think the miscegenation rates total in America is like 3%. So it's basically like, in that sense, it's like gay people, where it's like such a small subset of the population. And I would say that if it starts rising rapidly, like, if it goes up to like 5% or 10%, then I would say that, yeah, that's becoming a problem. But, in a multiracial society with a 2% miscegenation rate, it's not really the biggest problem facing, the racial groups. So, as you can see, this is kind of what black men are pissed off about. Because of this happening, where black women saw, as you can see, they see the benefit of being put over black men in the social hierarchy, right? And I think that, like, these upper class white men, or whatever you want to call them, elite white men, it's beneficial for them because it reduces the competition, just like basically putting average white men in the same rung as white women reduces competition against other white men, right? And then black men basically have no chance of competition, because the way that society shifted, and then the DEI stuff displaced all men at the same time. It displaced all average men, right? It's not white men or black men or Asian men. It displaced all average men, right? So really what it is it's between average men and women because of this. Because they can hire an average woman for an average job for average pay and get all their DEI quotas, right? And displace men, right? Because that whatever 10% or so of men, those are the average men, that have been displaced due to, diversity, which is basically just democracy, right? And so now men are saying, well, can we get 50%? Can we at least go back to 50%, total gender diversity, right? And on top of that, you've got black men saying that, we're actually smarter than black women on average. So why did we end up at the bottom of the social hierarchy? Like, it's a question that white people do have to answer, because it was convenient for you at the time, even though black men fought in wars with you to help secure the United States, that it was more convenient for you to displace black men so that there was no, competing, right? It was more convenient for this top tier white man to, displace everybody with women, right? That's really what happened. They disenfranchised everybody through women, right? And then average white men probably are somewhere in between here, like in between white women and black women, right? And that's why, black men seem to think that, white men have more options with black women. And it is true that, white men, due to the fact that they're just the majority group in the country still, they miscegenate the most. And they also complain about miscegenation the most. But if you look at just raw data, either from gross statistics or by per capita, either way, white men just are miscegenating the most. They impregnate the most out of race women than any other group. And they're married to the most out of race women than any other group. You could say it's just an effect of being the majority, or it's an effect of, the representation of elite white men. And so women are attracted to that because they have more money. Either way, I think that that's kind of the problem that black men have, is that that through civil rights, they were put underneath their own women, while, and then average white men were also basically pushed down to the same level as their women. And then that created this hypergamy effect, where now the average white woman sees the average white man as too poor to date, even though the average white salary is basically still the highest. I mean, excluding like Asians, East Asians or whatever, still like the highest on average income. So it basically, you know what I'm saying? It just messed everything up at the time. Because I think that if we were going to look back, right, and we had reached this Obama period, and then black men were kind of not in this lower rung, right, of the social hierarchy. Like if we had gone back to the Obama period, or gotten to the Obama period, and the psychological demarcation that it's like, okay, well, we've reached a certain level of disenfranchisement of white people, i.e., the president has been, the highest office in the nation has been disenfranchised by a black man. So now we've reached a certain marcation point, and now we need to reevaluate, the situation. And black men were saying, well, hey, we put one guy in there and he's not even actually a black guy. I mean, I was like skewered for that. People are like, oh, you're a wet blanket. Immediately when Obama got elected, I was like, but he's not black. He's African. And people were like, oh, you're ruining it. You're ruining it. You're ruining it. I'm like, but he's not. Right. So I think that if we had reached this point at the Obama point, and this had been reversed to where it's black men had been above black women in the social hierarchy, I think that we would have seen a lot different results as it goes to like people being upset with each other and feeling disenfranchised, right? But I think that both parties involved, when it comes to, average white men and black men, when we reached the Obama point, we felt kind of gypped. We all felt gypped, right? Like, white men were like, well, okay, now we've been completely disenfranchised from power as represented by Obama. And black men were saying, hey, he's not even black. And we're still basically in the same spot we were before civil rights. Actually, we're in a worse spot than we were, because at least before civil rights, before integration, black men were above black women in the social hierarchy. And because of this happening, because of black women taking the deal with white women to disenfranchise men from the workforce, now everybody's pissed, right? Everybody's pissed off because nobody can get a date. Women are all calling us all losers, right? And it really seems that as though the only solution is for women to accept that part of the democratic process is the fact that they have to be willing to be disenfranchised. Right? Because look, men accepted their disenfranchisement. White men definitely willingly accepted their disenfranchisement. They voted for Obama. White people voted for Obama. A lot of white people. And I think that was a sign of goodwill that a lot of people took for granted. Even though you can say, oh, he's not black. To most white people, they considered him black, and they saw it as a demarcation line, right? And I think now men are seeing this 56% women thing as kind of like a similar Obama moment, where it's like, okay, we've been disenfranchised this much, and you want to talk crap about us. And it's the same thing with the Obama thing, right? It's like white men accepted disenfranchisement from power, from political power, but you still want to talk crap about them. You still just want to talk down to them or talk in a certain way where it's like, you didn't do anything. And no, it was women. The women teamed up together because they knew that it would lead to the disenfranchisement of average men. Because they don't want to be with average men because they feel that they're above average men. Because why else would black women accept this? Why would black women accept this type of disenfranchisement where their enfranchisement comes at the cost of making black men the lowest on the social hierarchy in the United States, right? Black women could have easily said, hey, we don't want those jobs. Those jobs were for black men that fought in the wars. Because that's basically what civil rights really was about. That's what it really was about. It was about, okay, black people, we fought in the wars. Can we be citizens now? And they were like, yeah, but we're going to do this thing where we disenfranchise everyone. And then average white men also got caught in the crossfire of the disenfranchisement process, right? So now everybody's pissed. Everybody's pissed. And it's not, black men shouldn't be pissed at white men, because white men willingly, went along with the democratic process. That's all they did. They didn't do anything. The average white men didn't do anything wrong except go along with the democratic process. And black men, like, we didn't do anything wrong either. We didn't put white women into the diversity and equity roles. That was elite white men who we can see the elite white men are the people that are going to be the least affected by this whole system in the first place, right? Because you can still see that it's white, 70%, 60 something percent in leadership roles. And in the higher levels, we can see that it's male dominated still. It's either 50-50 male or leaning more towards male dominant, right? But when it comes to non-managers and just regular managers, then it's female dominated. So basically the lower level or average IQ, average income jobs, right? And so that's what we're seeing, right? And it doesn't line up. It doesn't line up, right? This doesn't line up, because if the IQ argument is to withhold, if you want to withhold or withstand, if the IQ argument is to withstand scrutiny, then you kind of do have to fix this, right? Because black men are more intelligent than black women, right? So how did black men end up at the bottom of the social hierarchy below white women, right? And then also elite white men, right? Because that it is, I'm not saying all white men. I'm not saying it's all white men. Most white men are just regular cool dudes. But we can see that these elite white men, they're not being affected by the system. It's the same thing with the dating thing. And you could say, oh, well, it's a free market, blah, 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 blah. But it's not. DEI is not a free market. DEI is a specific government program that's put together to force companies to hire more females. And then women, I don't want to say it's because of their nature. Maybe it's just because they haven't been in the political process as long, and the democratic process as long. And no one's really teaching them that they have to be prepared for their own disenfranchisement in order to fix society, which white people were willing to accept, right? White men were willing to accept their own disenfranchisement to help society go along and to help the democratic process. And I think that it's women's turn. It's women's turn to accept some disenfranchisement in order to fix this, because of what I said before about the women not wanting to hunt down men, right? And also that it just doesn't hold with the IQ statistics. Like, I'm fine with human biodiversity statistics, but the argument, it doesn't hold when this happens. And I think that might be one of the reasons why black men are less willing to accept the IQ arguments, because this doesn't hold, right? If you really want the IQ arguments to hold, then the only way really is to, disenfranchise women from the workforce by getting rid of, I'm not saying get rid of all women from the workforce, but they have to be willing to accept a democratically run disenfranchisement and remove these government mandated gender quotas, right? Because that's going to fix a lot of the problems. It's going to fix this, basically. And then this will hold, and then arguments can be made around this. More honest arguments can be made around human biodiversity. And then, we won't have to accept this as the demarcation line anymore. We can look for a new demarcation line where it's more something like, I don't know, something like 50-50 or like the officers, where it's more men than women, slightly more men than women, because we just have to accept that men need the money to start families. Women don't need the money to start families. And then we look what's happening to families. Family formation is going down, women's money is going up. Women's political enfranchisement goes up. Family formation goes down. So, women have to be honest too, right? They have to say, if they want to come out and say, hey, we want to destroy society, we don't care if society fails because we like buying stuff at Target more than society running. Well, maybe we need to disenfranchise women. I don't know how else we could do it but through the democratic process, right? And so that's pretty much what I had to say about it. Really, to sum it up, basically, we got this here where, your average white man has been pushed down to the level of a white woman. Black women have been artificially elevated above black men. So now the average white man is mad because he can't date a white woman because of this, that the gender diversity is higher for women than men in the workforce. And black men are mad at both white men and black women because it's not true that black men should be at the lowest rung of the social hierarchy if jobs are related to having IQ. Pay is related to IQ. That would mean that, black women should be below black men. And then that would incentivize more family formation. And then we can go back to the 90s where everybody was at home with their families. I don't think that's going to happen, but, that would be the ideal thing where people would be at home with their families when they're not at work, as opposed to, twerking and doing all sorts of other stuff. So that's the video. Thanks for watching if you did. Have a good day and peace.